I guess we can get underway. Welcome everybody here and online. This evening, I'm going to talk a little bit about Vairotsana. That's kind of a curious topic, right? Why did you come to hear a talk about Vairotsana?
I heard about Vairotsana back home, but I never studied about Vairotsana.
You heard about it. Back home being?
Back in Tibet.
Yeah. So you're from Tibet. Okay. I had a hunch. And ma'am, why would one come to a talk about Vairotsana?
Well, I'm staying here, so I'm coming to every talk.
Ah.
Hoping to learn something.
Okay, good.
And ask good questions, hopefully.
Okay. Well, feel free to interrupt both you guys and online if you have questions. Just unmute yourself and start talking. Yeah, no problem. So let's see. I have this PowerPoint. I'm going to do that first. Vairotsana. There's also a Buddha called Vairotsana, and Vairotsana Buddha is in the center of an array or mandala of meditational deities or dhyani Buddhas, and Vairotsana particularly is sort of the transmutation or the reversal of ignorance, not knowing. Yeah, and in Buddhist thought, it's really ignorance or not knowing or marikpa in Tibetan that is sort of the root of every difficulty. All of samsara or cyclic existence arises from this lack of knowing. And so Vairotsana is the sort of complete opposite of that. That is to say, totality of knowledge, or as the subtext says here, the face that faces everywhere, which is very evocative. Sometimes when you see a statue or a tanka of Vairotsana, it'll show him with like multiple faces and pointing, facing in different directions. So it's evoking a sense of panoramic knowledge, or we might say even omniscience, like that. And so Vairotsana, one way we can think about him is as an emanation of the Buddha Vairotsana. And then let's see. So this is an image. Yeah, pretty good. This is a whole new system for us, with these screens. So I'm kind of in a state of wonderment that this is actually working. So this is a very beautiful tanka image of Vairotsana. And he's usually often referred to as Vairotsana the Translator. And so he lived 8th century time, central Tibet. This was the time of the great imperial period of Chizong Detsen, and who invited from India the great abbot Shantarakshita, who had been the abbot of Nalanda, the great Buddhist university there in North India. So Shantarakshita comes, the king is there, and then after a time, Shantarakshita suggests to the king that he should also invite Guru Padmasambhava, who came as well. So we had this trio of people, really powerful spiritual people, and the king, Chizong Detsen, his inspiration from being like 17 or 18 years old, he had this idea of bringing the Buddhist teachings from India into Tibet, kind of his thing. So he, like I say, he invited Shantarakshita and Guru Padmasambhava, and together they worked on the construction of the first Buddhist monastery in Tibet, Asami Monastery, which is in central Tibet, south and across the river from Lhasa. And then there was this notion of, well, the Tibetans are kind of wild, kind of Wild West a little bit. And, maybe, we don't know. Shantarakshita was kind of the opinion, I don't know if these Tibetans, if they can become monks or not, so we'll run a test group, right, of 7 young boys who were selected for their intelligence and stuff to be the sort of the trial group of the first monks, ordained people in Tibet. And Vairotsana was among that group. So from a very young age, he entered into the monastic training of Buddhism under Shantarakshita. And so we see him here in this image. He's wearing monastic robes, and he's barefoot, which is very common for monastics, and he is wearing a pandita hat, so that pointed hat with the long flaps covering his ear, indicates that after he was a young monk, that he became highly educated and became a pandita in Sanskrit, or Tibetan is a kempo. So this is an indication that he's really like a PhD person, right? In terms of being totally immersed and familiar with the whole range of the Buddhist teachings. And here, these are the words of Jamgon Lingpa, actually. And here he's saying that his Vajra posture signifies primordial perfect awakening, and his 3 Dharma robes signifies that all of the vehicles in their entirety. And the elegant Pandita's hat represents the natural state of the great perfection. So what's being pointed to is that Vairotsana, is a fully awakened person, or Buddha, really, that he has accomplished primordial perfect awakening. And he is also, the second line referring to the robes, is that he's fully expert in the foundational vehicles of the smaller vehicles, Shravaka Yana, Pratyeka Buddha Yana, Vinaya teachings of ordained monks. He's totally mastered that. He's also mastered the teachings of the great vehicle, the Mahayana, which are the teachings rooted in compassionate awareness of suffering and a wish upon getting really sort of dialed into that to become enlightened of all beings. So he's taken on that vast attitude of bodhicitta, and then also he's mastered the in our Nyingma tradition we have 6 levels of Vajrayana practice. The outer tantras, Kriya, Charya, Upa, and the inner tantras of Maha, Anu, and Ati, for the great perfection. And so he's mastered all of this. And in fact, his translation work, and he's shown in this image holding a Tibetan Pecha-style book. And the way those books were made is they have kind of like a board on the top and a board on the bottom. And then there's loose leaf, and the sheets of paper are maybe 4 inches tall, and then, 18, 20 inches long or something, different sizes. But it's all loose leaf, and so you put one board on top and another backboard underneath, and then you bind it together. Here it looks like he's got some sort of string or something that's holding it all together. Usually it's just wrapped in cloth and held together that way. But the fact that he's holding that book is pointing to not only his learnedness in all of these levels of Buddhist practice, but that he also translated texts on all levels of the Buddhist teachings from the Sanskrit and other languages into Tibetan. This 8th century early translation period. And that's where, here we're sitting in the Nyingma Institute, that's where the word Nyingma comes into play, because these translations that were done in this early period were amazing. And for a few centuries there was only Buddhism. There wasn't Nyingma per se, but what happened later, 10th, 11th, 12th century, more teachings came in from India. And those came to be known as the newer teachings, or Sarma Tibetan, and the older ones from the 8th century time were the Nyingma. So that's how we get, when we talk about Nyingma Institute, and Tarthang Rinpoche's emphasis has always been on the Nyingma tradition. It's referring to the teachings that were introduced in that early period at Sami Monastery with Guru Rinpoche and King Trisong Detsen and the abbot Shantarakshita. So Vairotsana was right in the middle of it, right? He was one of the first monks, yeah. So then, and again, these are words from Jamgon Lingpa. This is sort of devotional home from the heart of the vast glacial ocean Vairotsana. This is referring to the Buddha, Vairotsana. Come now, Lotsva Vairotsana, pray. And again, in this image, he's always depicted with the Pandita hat, yeah, and a blue shirt, I guess you could say. And then the monastic robes on top, and always holding a text here. The page is actually out of the backboards are gone. He's actually holding the sheet of paper so that he can read and teach from it. So another image. Yeah, and then there is a mantra that provides for the evocation or invocation of Vairotsana. And it's also invoking two other figures, Marinch and Sok, and three of them. Referring to in this mantra, Nyak, Shana Kumara. So Marinch and Sok, Chok, and Nyak. These are also translated. So Vairotsana is the principal one here, and then above we see the other two, and they are indicated by the Ratna. Oma Vairotsana Ratna. Oma Guru Vairotsana Ratna. Om Guru Vairotsana. Soha Om Guru Vairotsana. So, he, when they got the monastery, Sami Monastery built, then the next thing was to bring the teachings. Shantarakshita and Padmasambhava, they could do what they wanted to do, but they gathered together a number of people. Some of them were designated to go to India, receive teachings in India from the masters there and come back, right? And then there were also some other masters that were invited to actually come from India to Tibet, like Shantarakshita's principal disciple Kamalashila came from India to Tibet, which we say, so sort of offhanded and easy, but back then it was really hard and literally life-threatening. The passes of the Himalayas are really high. and there's snow and there's wind and there's no food and people die. Now we have airplanes and we just fly over. It's easy peasy. But back in those days, it was when you said, "Oh, I'm going to go to India and receive teachings," that was like a huge sacrifice and commitment to make, actually. Really taking your life in your own hands. And so, anyway, Vairotsana and his companion Lekdrub, the two of them, were sent to receive teachings in India, and eventually they make their way into the presence of Sri Singha there in India, who was one of the great lineage holders of the Ati, or the great lineage. And at that time, the Great Perfection teachings were highly secretive, not widely spread, and they would Sri Singha would teach, and Lekdrub would be like the scribe. And he was instructed that, they would have like cotton cloth, and then with milk or goat's milk or cow milk, kind of milk. Anyway, they would use that to write the letter, to write down the words. So you couldn't see them. You just looked at the cloth. But if you held the cloth over smoke of a fire, then, the letters would appear. So they had all of these kind of like security systems built in, so that these teachings would not be distributed to people who were not ready to receive them. And so there's a lot of kind of secrecy and security around this. Anyway, Vairotsana receives many, many teachings from Sri Singha, and he also has a visionary encounter with more senior lineage holder, Garab Dorje, and receives teachings directly from him. So then, he, having received these teachings and having the writings compiled, he comes back to central Tibet and to Unfathomable Monastery. And and he apparently said that he was very, very, one of these just amazingly intelligent people that can learn languages, like I said, I forget how many, like 50 different languages he knew, all the different, because in India there's lots of different languages, and then even across, the Himalayan regions, there's lots and lots. I mean, it's gotten simpler over time, but certainly back then there were just many, many, many different languages and dialects and scripts, different forms of writing. So he mastered all of that stuff. So he comes back, and then they undertake the process of translation. And so in Tibetan, the word for translator is Lotsava. And the way all the translations were done, it was always a pair, at least a pair of people. There would be somebody from the Indian tradition, the Pandita, working in partnership with the Tibetan Lotsava translator. And so you would have mastery on both sides of that equation. The Pandita was learned in the teachings and learned in Sanskrit linguistics, and then the Lotsava would work, from the Tibetan side to render that into Tibetan. And so Vairotsana was really the leader in that process. But this involved hundreds of people filling both roles on both sides. The Pandita and the Lotsava at that time, because basically King Trison doesn't. He was the king, and introducing Buddhism was his thing. That was his commitment, and so he just opened up the imperial treasury for this purpose, so that they were able to invite many people to work on this project, and then scribes had to write it all down, and they had to organize it into sections of teachings and so on and so forth. It's a huge project. And so that's what Vairotsana was really known for. And, but it was really hard to get to India. And then when he got back to Tibet, it wasn't easy either. There was a queen, Margyen, the emperor had a number of queens, and one of them, Margyen, because apparently Vairotsana was an extremely handsome and charismatic man. And so the queen invites him to, what shall we say, a romantic rendezvous, perhaps you could say. A nooner? I don't know what the right word is. But, he's a monk, right? And so, and he's serious about that. And so, he declined her very generous offer. And you know how it is. People really go funny places sometimes in that space. And, she began to really hold it against him, and she started slandering him with, there in the royal household and with the ministers and the secretaries, the royal administration and so forth, and kind of fomented this negativity about him. And then there were also negative rumors coming from the Indian side, who were really kind of PO'd that so many of these wonderful teachings had been taken from India to Tibet. And so the Indian teachers were slandering, Vairotsana, saying, oh, his teachings are false, and so forth and so on. So he's just getting it from all sides, basically. And it really just got built up into this big scandal. To the point where people were calling for him to be executed, and the king, who had been receiving teachings at length from Vairotsana, was not about to do that. But he sort of, as a compromise gesture, he agreed to exile or banish Vairotsana to Gyalmo, which back at that time was another kingdom altogether. And Gyalmo, one of our co-deans here at the Institute, Mama Pawsang, actually is from Gyalmo. And so where that's located is kind of east and south a little bit from central Tibet. Central Tibet, the plateau is very high, but by the time you get to Gyalmo, you're beginning to descend down towards the plains of China. And, like there's bamboo, whereas up on the plateau, it's a bigger, like desert, but down there, it's much more verdant, and there's bamboo. It's actually where the pandas live. The panda bears are in Gyalmo. And so he goes there, having been exiled by the king of Tibet. And he's a stranger in a strange land, right? And the people there, throw him into a frog pit. One bad thing after another. But he's Guru Rinpoche is a prince out there in Gyalmo. Down in the pit, Vairotsana is reciting teachings out loud, and Guru, the prince, he hears these teachings. Oh, this is not just any lout, this is a learned person, And so anyway, they bring him up out of the frog pit, and eventually they come to realize that he's actually an amazing Buddhist teacher. And the way Lama Pawsang talks about it is that Vairotsana is sort of like the national hero of Gyalmo. People really, really venerate him, and that his style of the sort of, by now, what we would call ancient style of pronunciation of Tibetan has in many ways been preserved in Gyalmo. Tibetan has a lot of prefixes and suffixes, often which go silent, certainly in central Tibetan or Lhasa dialect. But over there, all of those things are very slightly voiced. So it's very, very different if you listen to classic, old school kind of speaker. And there still are some from that region. Also, first time I heard him speak Tibetan, it was just a revelation, because I was hearing the prefixes and the suffixes that I had never heard before. Very, very faint, but they're there. So anyway, that all goes back to Vairotsana. He's also, for those interested in the Great Perfection or Dzogchen teachings, Vairotsana was responsible for what are now known as the 5 early translations of the mind section or semsde of the Great Perfection teachings. And one of those is, I can go through here because it's very short, called, and it's interesting because a Sanskrit manuscript of this was preserved in the Dunhuang Caves. The Dunhuang Caves up kind of north on the Silk Route, way kind of up towards like the Gobi Desert and up that way, very dry climate. And there's these caves in Dunhuang where ancient times, many texts were put in this cave and sealed up. It was such a dry environment that they survived for centuries and centuries. And they were finally discovered by this British person, and now have been a great source of interest in scholarship. Old Sanskrit texts, old Tibetan texts. And one of those is there. It's called the Cuckoo of Awareness. And it's a very interesting title, bird song, can be very kind of sudden and interruptive. You're just sitting there and then you get, a bird, pipes up, or a cuckoo, or here we have these doves, I know I'm a Berkeley native and I just hear the morning doves, and woo, woo, and I know I'm home, it's just like, I don't know, but they just kind of, it's not premeditated by us. The sound of the bird's voice just comes in suddenly and sort of and just for that moment, our sort of internal narrative is broken up, right? And it's like, poof, it's like that. So the title of it is the Rigpa Kutruk, or the Cuckoo of Rigpa Awareness. And it says Rigchet Nangma Gyen. This is all about the title. So this is like the shining ornament that produces Rigchet, that produces knowledge. And Dorje Sik Druk. And so it has 6 indestructible Vajra lines. So it's very short, just 6 lines. So that's all about the title. And like I say, this is one of the 5 early translations that Vairotsana did. Then it goes on to say svasti, which is a Sanskrit word, and it's sort of a blessing to begin with the idea that, may everything be auspicious. Our discussion of this text or listening of this text is going to be just sweet and wonderful. Everything auspicious. Yeah, it's awesome. Then it says Pel, which is like glory of glories. Tundende, victorious conqueror, Kuntuzanko, ever excellent, or Samantabhadra. Kusum Tuk, which in Sanskrit is Kaya Vakachita, or enlightened body, speech, and mind. Dorje Dewa Chepo. Vajra, indestructible Vajra, great bliss, La, Jaksalo, so homage to the victorious conqueror, most glorious Samantabhadra, enlightened body, speech. Then, so that's the title and homage, and then you get to the 6 lines, and it says, Natsok, Ramjin, Mini, Kam. So Natsok is like variety or diversity, and the Rangjin is the nature. So diversity's nature is mini, and it's non-dual, it's not 2. So all of this diversity is actually a singularity. Chashe Yid, Chodandra. And so Chache is like the parts, but the essential nature of parts is actually Chodandra. It's beyond any concept. What is the essential nature of difference in the part? And that's beyond actual concept. And then it says Jijinpa, the way things are, just as it is. Mitok is non-conceptual. So, how to say this? Just like all of our, we could say like all of our problems are like mind created. All of our emotional dramas, it's all mind, right? Here, he's just saying things as they are. Just and the way to express that is like when you just strip away all of the concepts, just to the bare naked fact of experience. Yeah, shorn, all the concepts, all the emotions, all of that's gone. Just the pure fact of experience is this Jinpa. And then he says everything like that is just pure, not pure in the sense of being good or bad, but just pure in the sense of being just naked. It's just like all of that thought process stuff is gone. And again, this is where the cuckoo comes in, where you get that real hit of the bird song. You just in that very moment, you're just awake, without any thoughts about it. Sure. And then he says, Nampar Nangze Kunjuzang. This is saying that everything that is made to appear, or everything that is created, is already Kunjuzangpam. It is Samantabhadra, it is all good, ever excellent. You don't need to fix anything. Just the sort of that naked facticity, pure fact, perfect, complete, just as it is. You don't have to like tinker with it to make it better. It's perfect. It ain't broke, don't fix it. It ain't broke. From the very beginning, it ain't broke. And so then it says Zinpe Tsuwe Ned Pam. So if we hold to that experience, things in their sort of naked facticity and their intrinsic completeness, and hang in there, then we can release or relinquish or abandon sort of the malaise or the illness of always making effort. It's like, it's kind of like you can relax because you're already there right now. This instant of the cuckoo and the bird song, right now, everything's just fine. We keep kind of projecting, 20 years from now, it's going to be perfect. I'll have the perfect house and the perfect partner and the perfect car and a lot of money in my bank account and I'll know everything and people will love me and da 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 da. Back then, it's always projected out into the future. And so here it's being front loaded right now. Everything is perfect. And so when that settles in and we kind of hold to that, then we can let go of the effortful striving, get caught up in it. And then finally, the sixth line says, Lungi nepe jakpa yin. So then this is like effortlessly we abide. Jakpa, and we remain. That's it. Yeah. It's really beautiful. Really, really beautiful. So he translated Vairotsana. He translated these 5 original translations from the semsde of the mind section of the Great Perfection. But he did so much more, right? So there's a set of teachings in Tibetan Buddhism called Kagye. These are sometimes translated as the Eight Commands. This goes way back to India and Dakini Leki Wangmo and the Eight Great Vidyadharas of India. And each of them received different teachings, Vajrakalaya and this and that, 8 different ones. But Padmasambhava, Guru Padmasambhava, he received all of them. So he brought all 8 of these sadhana teachings, probably categorized as Mahayoga teachings, deity practices. And so Padmasambhava brings all of these into Tibet and bestows them on his closest disciples, including Vairotsana. And so Vairotsana received empowerment into the forceful mantra practice. And he goes off to this place called Yamalong and practices there. So that's amazing that he was able to receive those teachings directly from Guru Rinpoche. There was a big debate with the Bunpo. The Bunpo are, back then, we had sort of the original spiritual teachings, sort of shamans, and more sort of natural, shamanistic, kind of much more kind of like American Indian kind of teaching. And there was a big debate between the newfangled Buddhist people and the old school Bunpo people. And so Vairotsana participated in that great debate, and the Buddhist teachers won. Let's see. Oh, and then the Guru Rinpoche or Guru Padmasambhava, this was so early, right, in the transmission process of Buddhism into Tibet. And Guru Rinpoche had the foresight or foreknowledge to realize, that there are a lot of teachings that the Tibetans at that stage, at that very early stage, weren't really ready to receive or to digest. And so he started this whole project of concealing teachings as treasures. In Tibetan we call it terma. And these often were transcribed by his close disciples, principally by his consort Yeshe Tsogyo, but also Vairotsana. There were 8 of them that were involved with the transcription or the writing down of the Terma teachings, and Vairotsana was one of those, which is also just amazing. And then when we look back historically, particularly in terms of the transmission of the Dzogchen or the Great Perfection teachings, it really coming into Tibet, it really comes down to, there's a few more, but the main ones are Padmasambhava, Vimalamitra, and Vairotsana. And Guru Padmasambhava really thought so highly of Vairotsana that he says his realization and we have the same realization, same level of accomplishment, same level of realization. Again, just amazing, actually. Let's see. Oh yeah, so he's banished out to Gyalmo-rong, right? Just picking up the story there. And he takes as a student this prince, Yudra Ningpo, and Yudra receives many, many teachings. And then eventually Yudra goes back to central Tibet and confers with Vimalamitra, who had been invited again by the king there in central Tibet around Same. And Yudra starts talking about the teachings he's received from Vairotsana, and they confers with Vimalamitra, and then they realize that they're like the same, that they're totally harmonious. And then people start getting it, like, oops, maybe it wasn't such a great idea to banish Vairotsana to Gyalmo-rong, I mean, we could have had him here the whole time, but now all these years have gone by. Anyway, Yudra goes back and suggests, it's kind of like Yudra sort of like calms everything down, He's kind of the go-between guy. And so then he and Vairotsana return. And as they're making their way from Gyalmarong to back to Tibet, they encounter this old man, and his name is Pam Mipam Gongpo, and he's like 70-year-old or something. And he says, "I'm old, and I've never received any Dharma teachings. Death is rapidly approaching. Please teach me. And so Vairotsana teaches him great perfection teachings, and also trains him in terms of how to meditate, and gets him outfitted with like a meditation belt because he's an old guy, right? And also this stick. There was this stick, and it had a little cup that would fit under Pami Bangongpo's chin. So you see old people that kind of hunched over. Anyway, they resolved all that hunched overness, and they gave the teachings. And Pam and Mipam Kampo had students. Every one of his students attained the rainbow body. So the rainbow body is one of the signs of a great accomplishment in the Dzogchen tradition, such that when these great practitioners die, they don't leave a corpse behind. It dissolves either into atoms or into rainbow light, or they just, in their body, they just go off in a body of light. And so, like I say, all of Mipam Kompo's students attain rainbow body, and there's been rainbow body accounts all the way up to modern times. I was had the good fortune to Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro came from Larangar, visited here, and gave teachings here, and then he also conferred with a professor over here at Cal who was all into brain science and stuff. And Khenpo, whips out his smartphone and starts showing pictures of this, and it was this person who had died, but his body had shrunk from full-size adult down to, like so, maybe too tall. And that's one of the signs. It's not like, so that's not like kind of like partial rainbow body, it's not completely dissolved away. So it's a great accomplishment. I also think it's just like really good manners, because you don't leave a dirty old corpse for people to deal with, right? So that's one of the features of this. Vairotsana played such a key role. And then Tarthang Rinpoche started talking to me about this a couple years ago, and he said that the Vairotsana has manifested or sort of reappeared emanations of Vairotsana. Many, but in particular, Rinpoche mentioned Mindroling Terchen, or the great Terton and founder of Mindroling Monastery, as well as in very recent times, 19th century times, Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Thaye, all these many Theravada teachings gathered together, as well as 4 other great. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
It's a bit of a silly one. I just really want to know what a frog pit is.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that too. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of this wet dank thing, and there's frogs down in there, and they throw the stranger from a strange land, and they just, we don't want you here, and throw them in a pit.
Exactly what I was picturing. That
Mhm.
is. Hadn't heard of that one before.
Yeah. So let's see. Other things to say. A couple more slides here. There is this book called The Great Image, and it is really very well done. And this is the life story or biography of Vairotsana, the translator. And the cover, you can see here, Vairotsana is teaching Pam Mipam Gongpo, the old man with the gray hair, and the stick that's, there's a stick little cross piece, and then the yogic meditation belt coming across his shoulder. So that's depicted on the cover. And so it's translated into English. And, you know, if I think anybody who's like really into the Nyingma teachings, it's very inspiring. It's a great read. It talks about not only his life, but it also talks about how the Great Perfection lineage manifested in like our world. Gives a lot of sort of background or context for the history of the Dzogchen. That's really good. What else? Oh yeah. And this is a very famous quote. So in the later the Sarma period of translations, there was a great translator called Nokulotsawa Lodro, and he said that Vairotsana's knowledge pervades like the sky. And two other translators from the early period, Kawa Paltsek and Chokro Louis Geltsen, are like the sun and moon. And Rinchen Zanpo, who was really sort of like the beginning of the Sarma translations, is like a dawn star. And before them, I am like a butterfly. So even very, very learned people, right, from the later, several centuries later period, look back at the work that Vairotsana did, translating texts, because it was all groundbreaking work, right? I mean, it was like, and the translations from the early translation period do have a different tone to them. In the Sarma translations over time, they developed a very strict and kind of mechanistic way of translating the Sanskrit into Tibetan. So you meet them, and you can tell right away that it's a translation of a Sanskrit text, that it's not something that's actually written in Tibetan. Because written, original Tibetan has a real nice flow to it. Reading Tibetan translations of Sanskrit, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like chewing sand. It's really crunchy. Anyway, they developed this system, which was very, very good because they in the the later translation, the Sarma, the newer translation, they developed this very rigorous system where they would break down the Sanskrit words into syllables. And then each syllable would get a Tibetan equivalent. So, like we have the word for transcendent wisdom, or just wisdom, in Sanskrit is prajna, pra, and jna. And so then this in Tibetan becomes she, the jna, or the knowing part, and the rap corresponds to the pra, like best or most highest. So, and Tibetan, everything's flipped. Pra goes crosses, the syllables cross this way. But in any event, the way the translations are, they were done on the syllable level rather than on the word level. Whereas the ancient translations of Vairotsana period were much more sort of lyrical and much more sort of meaning translations, not nearly as mechanistic as the later translations. And but the fact that the later translations were done with such a degree of specificity is really amazing, because at one point, some Tibetan scholars, they had a Tibetan text translation, something that had been translated from the Sanskrit into Tibetan, but the Sanskrit text had been lost. Okay? And so, of an afternoon or whatever, they decide that they're going to recreate, the Sanskrit text. So they create sort of what I'll call a synthetic Sanskrit text. Right? And so that's fine. And then years go by, and then this Dunhuang Cave that I referred to earlier is opened up, and they find the original Sanskrit, the text that they thought had been lost, right? And so they compared the newly discovered Sanskrit text with the synthetic Sanskrit that the Tibetan scholars had created. It was almost exactly the same because they had devised such a specific translation process by that later period. Yeah. Anyway, at the end. Oh, yeah. Then I said, as Padmasambhava said, Vairotsana is the same as me. And that's pretty much it. Roger, my good friend back there in the middle west. Hi. You got any questions about Vairotsana?
I can't say that I do. I happen to have the copy of the book you featured, and I have not read it other than maybe 50, 60 pages. So it was just to get me to take that book off the shelf and find the little prompt to read into it, read further on it.
Yeah, it's really quite something, actually, because it's got a lot of not only sort of the narrative of the story, but there's a lot of teachings in it. There's one here. Vairotsana traveled a lot to receive teachings, not only to India, but he also went to China. And this is something that he received this teaching from a Chinese woman who was a yogini, so sort of off by herself as a hermit. And she told him, if you seek enlightenment, let go of striving. If you seek to watch the mind, focus on the breath. If you seek wisdom, constantly apply mindfulness. If you seek bliss, check whether you've found the essence of the 5 emotional poisons. If you seek enlightenment, you have failed. Well, that's again sort of referring to this notion of effortlessness that I was talking about earlier. You know, that if we're always looking for the next thing, you know, always striving, not getting it. And so this is what the Dakini said to Vairotsana. And then Vairotsana asked this Chinese yogini about the definitive meaning. And she replies, with the realization of space-like purity, virtue and non-virtue are mere conventions. Suffering and samsara have never existed. There is no effort towards unborn dharmas, or unborn phenomena. There is no liberation, there is no bondage. There has never been an essence of awakening. Those immature ones who fail to realize this chase in vain after supposed enemies, entirely forsake all virtuous dharmas. They cling to and hanker after the things of samsara, and confused they wander through the roads. So,
What is it that made students, I guess, talented back in those years? Because there was no sciences, it was primarily philosophy, right, as one branch. So what makes a talented student talented?
uh, so a talented or accomplished student in this context gains a profound, deep understanding about how mind operates, how mind creates, you know, our unhappiness, and is able to see. So once you understand, once you become talented, right, see how you're tying yourself up in knots, then the answer is almost self-apparent. If you see how samsara or suffering, how that mechanism of mind works, then you can see through it. Yeah. So that's a great question. It's almost like gets right to the point. Like, why bother, right? What's with all this Buddhist philosophy and practice? And what makes one a talented or accomplished one? The whole Buddhist enterprise goes back to the Buddha's Four Noble Truths and the first Noble Truth, which is to acknowledge suffering. Just don't ignore it, but just look, and you'll see, that everybody has mental problems, stress, and they have anger, and families break up, they have horrible arguments with each other, grudges that are held for 25 years, and then at the end of all of that trouble, then you have to deal with old age, sickness, and death, which is not a lot of fun, right? And so the whole Buddhist enterprise starts there, right? And then you have this whole different range of different teachings for people of different capacities and inclinations and interests, in terms of like what works for them. That's why you have this, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, has this whole range. In our Nyingma tradition, we talk about these 9 different vehicles. Each one is suited for different people, but the function is the same. Function is to learn to tame the mind, to get a handle on the mind so that the mind stops manufacturing all of this negativity, all the suffering.
And also being able to transmit it to others.
And then, yeah,
So many
what-
teachers
once,
that are smart, they're not.
Really good at teaching.
yeah, well,
I'm not talking about Buddhism. I just
It's like middle school flashback.
yeah.
um,
So yeah, a really good teacher, right? A really great Buddhist teacher, actually sort of magnetizes the mind of the student into the awakened experience. It's like a mind-to-mind transmission of what all these words are pointing to. That's a real master. Then you have other masters who are really smart and can say all the nice words properly and so forth. And that's great too. But a real sort of what we say, sort of Mahasiddha, or great accomplished one, who's got real talented. They just by, I had the great good fortune when I was very young. I was like 21. And His Holiness Dunhuang Rinpoche, Jigdra Yeshe Dorje, who at that time was the supreme Vidyadhara or knowledge holder of the new tradition, was the top guy. And he came to our retreat center, Orgyen. He was there for like 5 days. And, and he didn't speak any English, but you picked it up. And that was just like a transmission or a teaching, just because his realization was so powerful. He just naturally, your mind would just flow into that incredible clarity. So that's like a real talented teacher. I can say they can just experientially bring anybody who comes in contact with them into that.
Title of the book, it says, does it say, yeah, it says, I might be lacking the correct pronunciation, but it says Vairotsana at the,
Vairotsana. Yeah.
it says, okay, maybe I
Yeah,
saw
and
it
the
incorrectly.
title is what is called The Great Image, which is I don't have the Tibetan in front of them. So, yeah, it's like you're getting a picture of this great translator, Vairotsana. You're getting an image of him. It's encapsulated in that story.
So I guess my question would be the connection between Vairotsana and then the Vairotsana Buddha that you mentioned at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Are they like not interchangeable, but are they like closely associated with each other, or is it more of like a follower-student kind of?
So we have this idea of emanation or manifestation. And so Vairotsana is the fully awakened Buddha. And then there's this idea of and that Buddha awakened space is totally beyond time. It's timeless dimension. And then we talk about these emanations that they send forth that actually come down into lived history. He lived in in the 8th century, and he did X, Y, and Z. The Buddha Vairotsana stands out, kind of transcendent state. So Vairotsana, the translator, is sometimes thought of as an emanation of the Buddha Vairotsana. Okay. Which kind of leads me to this little dedication that I put together. Conclusion. By the blessings of Buddha Vairotsana and his emanation, Vairotsana Pabor, may we all come together, mandala, in actual experience. All that is seen is divine, all that is heard is sacred mantra, dharma, and all thoughts that are radiant. Thank you all very much. Take care out there in Zululand. Yeah. Okay. Let's see.